OSHA 1904. Recordkeeping. OSHA 1904.0. Purpose. The purpose of this rule, Part 1904, is to require employers to record and report work-related fatalities, injuries, and illnesses. Note to Section 1904.0, recording or reporting a work-related injury, illness, or fatality does not mean that the employer or employee was at fault, that an OSHA rule has been violated, or that the employee is eligible for workers' compensation or other benefits. 1904 Subpart B. Scope. 1904.1. Partial exemption for employers with 10 or fewer employees. 1904.1 A. Basic requirement. 1904.1 A.1. If your company had 10 or fewer employees at all times during the last calendar year, you do not need to keep OSHA injury and illness records unless OSHA or the Bureau of Labor Statistics informs you in writing that you must keep records under Section 1904.41 or Section 1904.42. However, as required by Section 1904.39, all employers covered by the OSHA Act must report to OSHA any work-related incident that results in a fatality, the inpatient hospitalization of one or more employees, an employee amputation, or an employee loss of an eye. 1904.1 A.2. If your company had more than 10 employees at any time during the last calendar year, you must keep OSHA injury and illness records unless your establishment is classified as a partially exempt industry under Section 1904.2. 1904.1 B. Implementation. 1904.1 B.1 is the partial exemption for size based on the size of my entire company or on the size of an individual business establishment? The partial exemption for size is based on the number of employees in the entire company. 1904.1 B.2. How do I determine the size of my company to find out if I qualify for the partial exemption for size? To determine if you are exempt because of size, you need to determine your company's peak employment during the last calendar year. If you had no more than 10 employees at any time in the last calendar year, your company qualifies for the partial exemption for size. 1904.2. Partial exemption for establishments in certain industries, Subpart B. 1904.2 A. Basic requirement. 1904.2 A.1. If your business establishment is classified in a specific industry group listed in Appendix A to this subpart, you do not need to keep OSHA injury and illness records unless the government asks you to keep the records under Section 1904.41 or Section 1904.42. However, all employers must report to OSHA any workplace incident that results in an employee's fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye, see Section 1904.39. 1904.2 A.2. If one or more of your company's establishments are classified in a non-exempt industry, you must keep OSHA injury and illness records for all of such establishments unless your company is partially exempted because of size under Section 1904.1. 1904.2 B. Implementation. 1904.2 B.1 is the partial industry classification exemption based on the industry classification of my entire company or on the classification of individual business establishments operated by my company? The partial industry classification exemption applies to individual business establishments. If a company has several business establishments engaged in different classes of business activities, some of the company's establishments may be required to keep records, while others may be partially exempt. 1904.2 B.2. How do I determine the correct NAICS code for my company or for individual establishments? You can determine your NAICS code by using one of three methods, or you may contact your nearest OSHA office or state agency for help in determining your NAICS code. 1904.2 B.2 I through B.2 3. You can use the search feature at the U.S. Census Bureau NAICS main webpage, http://www.census.gov/eos/www/NAICS/. In the search box for the most recent NAICS, enter a keyword that describes your kind of business. A list of primary business activities containing that keyword and the corresponding NAICS codes will appear. Choose the one that most closely corresponds to your primary business activity, or refine your search to obtain other choices. Rather than searching through a list of primary business activities, you may also view the most recent complete NAICS structure with codes and titles by clicking on the link for the most recent NAICS on the U.S. Census Bureau NAICS main webpage, http://www.census.gov/eos/www/NAICS/. Then click on the 2-digit sector code to see all the NAICS codes under that sector. Then choose the 6-digit code of your interest to see the corresponding definition, as well as cross-references and index items, when available. If you know your oldest SISI code, you can also find the appropriate 2002 NAICS code by using the detailed conversion, concordance, between the 1987 SISI and 2002 NAICS available in Excel format for download at the concordances link at the U.S. Census Bureau NAICS main webpage, http://www.census.gov/eos/www/NAICS/. 1904.3 Keeping records for more than one agency. If you create records to comply with another government agency's injury and illness record-keeping requirements, OSHA will consider those records as meeting OSHA's Part 1904 record-keeping requirements if OSHA accepts the other agency's records under a Memorandum of Understanding with that agency, or if the other agency's records contain the same information as this Part 1904 requires you to record. You may contact your nearest OSHA office or state agency for help in determining whether your records meet OSHA's requirements. 1904 Subpart B, Appendix A, Partially Exempt Industries. Non-mandatory Appendix A TO Subpart B of Part 1904, Partially Exempt Industries. Employers are not required to keep OSHA injury and illness records for any establishment classified in the following North American Industry Classification System, NAICS, codes, unless they are asked in writing to do so by OSHA, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, or a state agency operating under the authority of OSHA or the BLS. All employers, including those partially exempted by reason of company size or industry classification, must report to OSHA any employee's fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye, see Section 1904.39. 4412. Other motor vehicle dealers. 4431. Electronics and appliance stores. 4461. Health and personal care stores. 4471. Gasoline stations. 4481. Clothing stores. 4482. Shoe stores. 4483. Jewelry, luggage, and leather goods stores. 4511. Sporting goods, hobby, and musical instrument stores. 4512. Book, periodical, and music stores. 4531. Florists. 4532. Office supplies, stationery, and gift stores. 4812. Non-scheduled air transportation. 4861. Pipeline transportation of crude oil. 4862. Pipeline transportation of natural gas. 4869. Other pipeline transportation. 4879. Scenic and sightseeing transportation, other. 4885. Freight transportation arrangement. 5111. Newspaper, periodical, book, and directory publishers. 5112. Software publishers. 5121. Motion picture and video industries. 5122. Sound recording industries. 5151. Radio and television broadcasting. 5172. Wireless telecommunications carriers, except satellite. 5173. Telecommunications resellers. 5179. Other telecommunications. 5181. Internet service providers and web search portals. 5182. Data processing, hosting, and related services. 5191. Other information services. 5211. Monetary Authorities Central Ban, K. 5221. Depository Credit Intermediation. 5222. Non-depository credit intermediation. 5223. Activities related to credit intermediation. 5231. Securities and Commodity Contracts Intermediation and Brokerage. 5232. Securities and Commodity Exchanges. 5239. Other financial investment activities. 5241. Insurance carriers. 5242. Agencies, brokerages, and other insurance-related activities. 5251. Insurance and employee benefit funds. 5259. Other investment pools and funds. 5312. Offices of real estate agents and brokers. 5331. Lessors of non-financial intangible assets, except copyrighted works. 5411. Legal services. 5412. Accounting, tax preparation, bookkeeping, and payroll services. 5413. Architectural, engineering, and related services. 5414. Specialized design services. 5415. Computer systems design and related services. 5416. Management, scientific, and technical consulting services. 5417. Scientific research and development services. 5418. Advertising and related services. 5511. Management of companies and enterprises. 5611. Office administrative services. 5614. Business support services. 5615. Travel arrangement and reservation services. 5616. Investigation and security services. 6111. Elementary and secondary schools. 6112. Junior colleges. 6113. Colleges, universities, and professional schools. 6114. Business schools and computer and management training. 6115. Technical and trade schools. 6116. Other schools and instruction. 6117. Educational support services. 6211. Offices of physicians. 6212. Offices of dentists. 6213. Offices of other health practitioners. 6214. Outpatient care centers. 6215. Medical and diagnostic laboratories. 6244. Child daycare services. 7114. Agents and managers for artists, athletes, entertainers, and other public figures. 7115. Independent artists, writers, and performers. 7213. Rooming and boarding houses. 7221. Full-service restaurants. 7222. Limited service eating places. 7224. Drinking places, alcoholic beverages. 8112. Electronic and precision equipment repair and maintenance. 8114. 8114. Personal and household goods repair and maintenance. 8121. Personal care services. 8122. Death care services. 8131. Religious organizations. 8132. Grant-making and giving services. 8133. Social advocacy organizations. 8134. Civic and social organizations. 8139. Business, professional, labor, political, and similar organizations. 1904 Subpart C. Record-keeping forms and recording criteria. Note to Subpart C. This subpart describes the work-related injuries and illnesses that an employer must enter into the OSHA records and explains the OSHA forms that employers must use to record work-related fatalities, injuries, and illnesses. 1904.4. Recording criteria. 1904.4a. Basic requirement. Each employer required by this part to keep records of fatalities, injuries, and illnesses must record each fatality, injury, and illness that 1904.4a1 through a3 is work-related, and is a new case, and meets one or more of the general recording criteria of Section 1904.7 or the application to specific cases of Sections 1904.8 through 1904.12. 1904.4 b. Implementation. 1904.4 b. 1. What sections of this rule describe recording criteria for recording work-related injuries and illnesses? The table below indicates which sections of the rule address each topic. 1904.4 b. 1 I through b. 1 4. Determination of work-relatedness. See Section 1904.5. Determination of a new case. See Section 1904.6. General recording criteria. See Section 1904.7. Additional criteria. Needlestick and sharps injury cases, tuberculosis cases, hearing loss cases, medical removal cases, and musculoskeletal disorder cases. See Sections 1904.8 through 1904.12. 1904.4 b. 2. How do I decide whether a particular injury or illness is recordable? The decision tree for recording work-related injuries and illnesses below shows the steps involved in making this determination. Did the employee experience an injury or illness? If no, do no record the injury or illness. Did the employee experience an injury or illness? If yes, is the injury or illness work-related? If no, do no record the injury or illness. But, if yes, is the injury a new case? If no, update the previously recorded injury or illness entry if necessary. If yes, does the injury or illness meet the general recording criteria of the application to specific case? If no, do no record the injury or illness. If yes, record the injury or illness. 1904.5. Determination of work-relatedness. 1904.5 a. Basic requirement. You must consider an injury or illness to be work-related if an event or exposure in the work environment either caused or contributed to the resulting condition or significantly aggravated a pre-existing injury or illness. Work-relatedness is presumed for injuries and illnesses resulting from events or exposures occurring in the work environment, unless an exception in Section 1904.5 b. 2 specifically applies. 1904.5 b. Implementation. 1904.5 b. 1. What is the work environment? OSHA defines the work environment as the establishment and other locations where one or more employees are working or are present as a condition of their employment. The work environment includes not only physical locations, but also the equipment or materials used by the employee during the course of his or her work. 1904.5 b. 2. Are there situations where an injury or illness occurs in the work environment and is not considered work-related? Yes. An injury or illness occurring in the work environment that falls under one of the following exceptions is not work-related, and therefore is not recordable. 1904.5 b. 2. You are not required to record injuries and illnesses if, at the time of the injury or illness, the employee was present in the work environment as a member of the general public rather than as an employee. The injury or illness involves signs or symptoms that surface at work but result solely from a non-work-related event or exposure that occurs outside the work environment. The injury or illness results solely from voluntary participation in a wellness program or in a medical, fitness, or recreational activity such as blood donation, physical examination, flu shot, exercise class, racquetball, or baseball. 1904.5 b. 2. You are not required to record injuries and illnesses if the injury or illness is solely the result of an employee eating, drinking, or preparing food or drink for personal consumption, whether bought on the employer's premises or brought in. For example, if the employee is injured by choking on a sandwich while in the employer's establishment, the case would not be considered work-related. Note: if the employee is made ill by ingesting food contaminated by workplace contaminants, such as lead, or gets food poisoning from food supplied by the employer, the case would be considered work-related. The injury or illness is solely the result of an employee doing personal tasks, unrelated to their employment, at the establishment outside of the employee's assigned working hours. 1904.5 b. 2. You are not required to record injuries and illnesses if the injury or illness is solely the result of personal grooming, self-medication for a non-work-related condition, or is intentionally self-inflicted. The injury or illness is caused by a motor vehicle accident and occurs on a company parking lot or company access road while the employee is commuting to or from work. 1904.5 B2. The illness is the common cold or flu. Note: contagious diseases such as tuberculosis, brucellosis, hepatitis A, or plague are considered work-related if the employee is infected at work. The illness is a mental illness. Mental illness will not be considered work-related unless the employee voluntarily provides the employer with an opinion from a physician or other licensed healthcare professional with appropriate training and experience, psychiatrist, psychologist, psychiatric nurse practitioner, etc., stating that the employee has a mental illness that is work-related. 1904.5 B3. How do I handle a case if it is not obvious whether the precipitating event or exposure occurred in the work environment or occurred away from work? In these situations, you must evaluate the employee's work duties and environment to decide whether or not one or more events or exposures in the work environment either caused or contributed to the resulting condition or significantly aggravated a pre-existing condition. 1904.5 B4. How do I know if an event or exposure in the work environment significantly aggravated a pre-existing injury or illness? A pre-existing injury or illness has been significantly aggravated, for purposes of OSHA injury and illness recordkeeping, when an event or exposure in the work environment results in any of the following. 1904.5 B4 I through B4 death, provided that the pre-existing injury or illness would likely not have resulted in death but for the occupational event or exposure. Loss of consciousness, provided that the pre-existing injury or illness would likely not have resulted in loss of consciousness but for the occupational event or exposure. One or more days away from work, or days of restricted work, or days of job transfer that otherwise would not have occurred but for the occupational event or exposure. Medical treatment in a case where no medical treatment was needed for the injury or illness before the workplace event or exposure, or a change in medical treatment was necessitated by the workplace event or exposure. 1904.5 B5. Which injuries and illnesses are considered pre-existing conditions? An injury or illness is a pre-existing condition if it resulted solely from a non-work-related event or exposure that occurred outside the work environment. 1904.5 B6. How do I decide whether an injury or illness is work-related if the employee is on travel status at the time the injury or illness occurs? Injuries and illnesses that occur while an employee is on travel status are work-related if, at the time of the injury or illness, the employee was engaged in work activities in the interest of the employer. Examples of such activities include travel to and from customer contacts, conducting job tasks, and entertaining or being entertained to transact, discuss, or promote business. Work-related entertainment includes only entertainment activities being engaged in at the direction of the employer. 1904.5 B6 1. If the employee has checked into a hotel or motel for one or more days, you may use the following to determine if an injury or illness is work-related. When a traveling employee checks into a hotel, motel, or into another temporary residence, he or she establishes a home away from home. You must evaluate the employee's activities after he or she checks into the hotel, motel, or other temporary residence for their work-relatedness in the same manner as you evaluate the activities of a non-traveling employee. When the employee checks into the temporary residence, he or she is considered to have left the work environment. When the employee begins work each day, he or she re-enters the work environment. If the employee has established a home away from home and is reporting to a fixed worksite each day, you also do not consider injuries or illnesses work-related if they occur while the employee is commuting between the temporary residence and the job location. If the employee has taken a detour for personal reasons, you may use the following to determine if an injury or illness is work-related. Injuries or illnesses are not considered work-related if they occur while the employee is on a personal detour from a reasonably direct route of travel, e.g., has taken a side trip for personal reasons. 1904.5 B7. How do I decide if a case is work-related when the employee is working at home? Injuries and illnesses that occur while an employee is working at home, including work in a home office, will be considered work-related if the injury or illness occurs while the employee is performing work for pay or compensation in the home, and the injury or illness is directly related to the performance of work rather than to the general home environment or setting. For example, If an employee drops a box of work documents and injures his or her foot, the case is considered work-related. If an employee's fingernail is punctured by a needle from a sewing machine used to perform garment work at home, becomes infected and requires medical treatment, the injury is considered work-related. If an employee is injured because he or she trips on the family dog while rushing to answer a work phone call, the case is not considered work-related. If an employee working at home is electrocuted because of faulty home wiring, the injury is not considered work-related. 1904.6 Determination of new cases. 1904.6 A basic requirement. You must consider an injury or illness to be a new case if 1904.6 A1 the employee has not previously experienced a recorded injury or illness of the same type that affects the same part of the body, or 1904.6 A2 the employee previously experienced a recorded injury or illness of the same type that affected the same part of the body but had recovered completely, all signs and symptoms had disappeared from the previous injury or illness, and an event or exposure in the work environment caused the signs or symptoms to reappear. 1904.6 B Implementation. 1904.6 B1 When an employee experiences the signs or symptoms of a chronic work-related illness, do I need to consider each recurrence of signs or symptoms to be a new case? No. For occupational illnesses where the signs or symptoms may recur or continue in the absence of an exposure in the workplace, the case must only be recorded once. Examples may include occupational cancer, asbestosis, bisonosis, and silicosis. 1904.6 B2 When an employee experiences the signs or symptoms of an injury or illness as a result of an event or exposure in the workplace, such as an episode of occupational asthma, must I treat the episode as a new case? Yes, because the episode or recurrence was caused by an event or exposure in the workplace, the incident must be treated as a new case. 1904.6 B2 When an employee experiences the signs or symptoms of an injury or illness as a result of an event or exposure in the workplace, such as an episode of occupational asthma, must I treat the episode as a new case? Yes, because the episode or recurrence was caused by an event or exposure in the workplace, the incident must be treated as a new case. 1904.6 B3 May I rely on a physician or other licensed healthcare professional to determine whether a case is a new case or a recurrence of an old case? You are not required to seek the advice of a physician or other licensed healthcare professional. However, if you do seek such advice, you must follow the physician or other licensed healthcare professional's recommendation about whether the case is a new case or a recurrence. If you receive recommendations from 2 or more physicians or other licensed healthcare professionals, you must make a decision as to which recommendation is the most authoritative, best documented, best reasoned, or most authoritative, and record the case based upon that recommendation. 1904.7 General Recording Criteria. 1904.7 A Basic Requirement. You must consider an injury or illness to meet the general recording criteria, and therefore to be recordable, if it results in any of the following: death, days away from work, restricted work or transfer to another job, medical treatment beyond first aid, or loss of consciousness. You must also consider a case to meet the general recording criteria if it involves a significant injury or illness diagnosed by a physician or other licensed healthcare professional, even if it does not result in death, days away from work, restricted work or job transfer, medical treatment beyond first aid, or loss of consciousness. 1904.7 B Implementation. 1904.7 B1 How do I decide if a case meets one or more of the general recording criteria? A work-related injury or illness must be recorded if it results in one or more of the following: 1904.7 B1 I through B1 6 death. See section 1904.7 B2. Days away from work. See section 1904.7 B3. Restricted work or transfer to another job. See section 1904.7 B4. Medical treatment beyond first aid. See section 1904.7 B5. Loss of consciousness. See section 1904.7 B6. A significant injury or illness diagnosed by a physician or other licensed healthcare professional. See section 1904.7 B7. 1904.7 B2. How do I record a work-related injury or illness that results in the employee's death? You must record an injury or illness that results in death by entering a check mark on the OSHA 300 log in the space for cases resulting in death. You must also report any work-related fatality to OSHA within 8 hours, as required by Section 1904.39. 1904.7 B3. How do I record a work-related injury or illness that results in days away from work? When an injury or illness involves 1 or more days away from work, you must record the injury or illness on the OSHA 300 log with a check mark in the space for cases involving days away and an entry of the number of calendar days away from work in the number of days column. If the employee is out for an extended period of time, you must enter an estimate of the days that the employee will be away, and update the day count when the actual number of days is known. 1904.7 B3 I. Do I count the day on which the injury occurred or the illness began? No, you begin counting days away on the day after the injury occurred or the illness began. 1904.7 B3 2. How do I record an injury or illness when a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends that the worker stay at home but the employee comes to work anyway? You must record these injuries and illnesses on the OSHA 300 log using the checkbox for cases with days away from work and enter the number of calendar days away recommended by the physician or other licensed healthcare professional. If a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends days away, you should encourage your employee to follow that recommendation. However, the days away must be recorded whether the injured or ill employee follows the physician or licensed healthcare professional's recommendation or not. If you receive recommendations from 2 or more physicians or other licensed healthcare professionals, you may make a decision as to which recommendation is the most authoritative, and record the case based upon that recommendation. 1904.7 B3 3. How do I handle a case when a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends that the worker return to work but the employee stays at home anyway? In this situation, you must end the count of days away from work on the date the physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends that the employee return to work. 1904.7 B3 4. How do I count weekends, holidays, or other days the employee would not have worked anyway? You must count the number of calendar days the employee was unable to work as a result of the injury or illness, regardless of whether or not the employee was scheduled to work on those days. Weekend days, holidays, vacation days, or other days off are included in the total number of days recorded if the employee would not have been able to work on those days because of a work-related injury or illness. 1904.7 B3 V. How do I record a case in which a worker is injured or becomes ill on a Friday and reports to work on a Monday, and was not scheduled to work on the weekend? You need to record this case only if you receive information from a physician or other licensed healthcare professional indicating that the employee should not have worked, or should have performed only restricted work, during the weekend. If so, you must record the injury or illness as a case with days away from work or restricted work, and enter the day counts, as appropriate. 1904.7 B3 6. How do I record a case in which a worker is injured or becomes ill on the day before scheduled time off, such as a holiday, a planned vacation, or a temporary plant closing? You need to record a case of this type only if you receive information from a physician or other licensed healthcare professional indicating that the employee should not have worked, or should have performed only restricted work, during the scheduled time off. If so, you must record the injury or illness as a case with days away from work or restricted work, and enter the day counts, as appropriate. 1904.7 B3 8. May I stop counting days if an employee who was away from work because of an injury or illness retires or leaves my company? Yes, if the employee leaves your company for some reason unrelated to the injury or illness, such as retirement, a plant closing, or to take another job, you may stop counting days away from work or days of restriction/job transfer. If the employee leaves your company because of the injury or illness, you must estimate the total number of days away or days of restriction/job transfer and enter the day count on the 300 log. 1904.7 B3 9. If a case occurs in 1 year but results in days away during the next calendar year, do I record the case in both years? No, you only record the injury or illness once. You must enter the number of calendar days away for the injury or illness on the OSHA 300 log for the year in which the injury or illness occurred. If the employee is still away from work because of the injury or illness when you prepare the annual summary, estimate the total number of calendar days you expect the employee to be away from work. Use this number to calculate the total for the annual summary, and then update the initial log entry later when the day count is known or reaches the 180-day cap. 1904.7 B4. How do I record a work-related injury or illness that results in restricted work or job transfer? When an injury or illness involves restricted work or job transfer but does not involve death or days away from work, you must record the injury or illness on the OSHA 300 log by placing a check mark in the space for job transfer or restriction and an entry of the number of restricted or transferred days in the restricted workdays column. 1904.7 B4 How do I decide if the injury or illness resulted in restricted work? Restricted work occurs when, as the result of a work-related injury or illness. 1904.7 B4 A and B. You keep the employee from performing one or more of the routine functions of his or her job, or from working the full workday that he or she would otherwise have been scheduled to work, or a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends that the employee not perform one or more of the routine functions of his or her job, or not work the full workday that he or she would otherwise have been scheduled to work. 1904.7 B4 2. What is meant by routine functions? For record-keeping purposes, an employee's routine functions are those work activities the employee regularly performs at least once per week. 1904.7 B4 3. Do I have to record restricted work or job transfer if it applies only to the day on which the injury occurred or the illness began? No, you do not have to record restricted work or job transfers if you, or the physician or other licensed healthcare professional, impose the restriction or transfer only for the day on which the injury occurred or the illness began. 1904.7 B4 4. If you or a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends a work restriction, is the injury or illness automatically recordable as a restricted work case? No, a recommended work restriction is recordable only if it affects one or more of the employee's routine job functions. To determine whether this is the case, you must evaluate the restriction in light of the routine functions of the injured or ill employee's job. If the restriction from you or the physician or other licensed healthcare professional keeps the employee from performing one or more of his or her routine job functions, or from working the full workday the injured or ill employee would otherwise have worked, the employee's work has been restricted and you must record the case. 1904.7 B4 V. How do I record a case where the worker works only for a partial work shift because of a work-related injury or illness? A partial day of work is recorded as a day of job transfer or restriction for record-keeping purposes, except for the day on which the injury occurred or the illness began. 1904.7 B4 6. If the injured or ill worker produces fewer goods or services than he or she would have produced prior to the injury or illness but otherwise performs all of the routine functions of his or her work, is the case considered a restricted work case? No, the case is considered restricted work only if the worker does not perform all of the routine functions of his or her job or does not work the full shift that he or she would otherwise have worked. 1904.7 B4 7. How do I handle vague restrictions from a physician or other licensed healthcare professional, such as that the employee engage only in light duty or take it easy for a week? If you are not clear about the physician or other licensed healthcare professional's recommendation, you may ask that person whether the employee can do all of his or her routine job functions and work all of his or her normally assigned work shift. If the answer to both of these questions is yes, then the case does not involve a work restriction and does not have to be recorded as such. If the answer to one or both of these questions is no, the case involves restricted work and must be recorded as a restricted work case. If you are unable to obtain this additional information from the physician or other licensed healthcare professional who recommended the restriction, record the injury or illness as a case involving restricted work. 1904.7 B4 8. What do I do if a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends a job restriction meeting OSHA's definition, but the employee does all of his or her routine job functions anyway? You must record the injury or illness on the OSHA 300 log as a restricted work case. If a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends a job restriction, you should ensure that the employee complies with that restriction. If you receive recommendations from 2 or more physicians or other licensed healthcare professionals, you may make a decision as to which recommendation is the most authoritative, and record the case based upon that recommendation. 1904.7 B. 4.9. How do I decide if an injury or illness involved a transfer to another job? If you assign an injured or ill employee to a job other than his or her regular job for part of the day, the case involves transfer to another job. Note: this does not include the day on which the injury or illness occurred. 1904.7 B. 4.x. Are transfers to another job recorded in the same way as restricted work cases? Yes, both job transfer and restricted work cases are recorded in the same box on the OSHA 300 log. For example, if you assign, or a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends that you assign, an injured or ill worker to his or her routine job duties for part of the day and to another job for the rest of the day, the injury or illness involves a job transfer. You must record an injury or illness that involves a job transfer by placing a check in the box for job transfer. 1904.7 B. 4.11. How do I count days of job transfer or restriction? You count days of job transfer or restriction in the same way you count days away from work, using section 1904.7 B. 3, 2, 8 above. The only difference is that, if you permanently assign the injured or ill employee to a job that has been modified or permanently changed in a manner that eliminates the routine functions the employee was restricted from performing, you may stop the day count when the modification or change is made permanent. You must count at least 1 day of restricted work or job transfer for such cases. 1904.7 B. 5. How do I record an injury or illness that involves medical treatment beyond first aid? If a work-related injury or illness results in medical treatment beyond first aid, you must record it on the OSHA 300 log. If the injury or illness did not involve death, 1 or more days away from work, 1 or more days of restricted work, or 1 or more days of job transfer, you enter a check mark in the box for cases where the employee received medical treatment but remained at work and was not transferred or restricted. 1904.7 B. 5. What is the definition of medical treatment? Medical treatment means the management and care of a patient to combat disease or disorder. For the purposes of Part 1904, medical treatment does not include 1904.7 B. 5 A through C. Visits to a physician or other licensed healthcare professional solely for observation or counseling. The conduct of diagnostic procedures, such as X-rays and blood tests, including the administration of prescription medications used solely for diagnostic purposes, e.g., eye drops to dilate pupils, or first aid as defined in paragraph B. 5.2 of this section. 1904.7 B. 5.2. What is first aid? For the purposes of Part 1904, first aid means the following: 1904.7 B. 5.2 A through N. Using a non-prescription medication at non-prescription strength, for medications available in both prescription and non-prescription form. A recommendation by a physician or other licensed healthcare professional to use a non-prescription medication at prescription strength is considered medical treatment for record-keeping purposes. Administering tetanus immunizations, other immunizations, such as hepatitis B vaccine or rabies vaccine, are considered medical treatment. Cleaning, flushing, or soaking wounds on the surface of the skin, using wound coverings such as bandages, band-aids, gauze pads, etc., or using butterfly bandages or steri-strips. Other wound closing devices such as sutures, staples, etc., are considered medical treatment. Using hot or cold therapy. Using any non-rigid means of support, such as elastic bandages, wraps, non-rigid back belts, etc. Devices with rigid stays or other systems designed to immobilize parts of the body are considered medical treatment for record-keeping purposes. Using temporary immobilization devices while transporting an accident victim, e.g., splints, slings, neck collars, backboards, etc. Drilling of a fingernail or toenail to relieve pressure, or draining fluid from a blister. Using eye patches. Removing foreign bodies from the eye using only irrigation or a cotton swab. Removing splinters or foreign material from areas other than the eye by irrigation, tweezers, cotton swabs, or other simple means. Using finger guards. Using massages, physical therapy, or chiropractic treatment are considered medical treatment for record-keeping purposes. Or Drinking fluids for relief of heat stress. 1904.7 B. 5. 3. Are any other procedures included in first aid? No, this is a complete list of all treatments considered first aid for Part 1904 purposes. 1904.7 B. 5. 4. Does the professional status of the person providing the treatment have any effect on what is considered first aid or medical treatment? No, OSHA considers the treatments listed in Section 1904.7 B. 5. 2 of this part to be first aid regardless of the professional status of the person providing the treatment. Even when these treatments are provided by a physician or other licensed healthcare professional, they are considered first aid for the purposes of Part 1904. Similarly, OSHA considers treatment beyond first aid to be medical treatment even when it is provided by someone other than a physician or other licensed healthcare professional. 1904.7 B. 5 V. What if a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends medical treatment but the employee does not follow the recommendation? If a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends medical treatment, you should encourage the injured or ill employee to follow that recommendation. However, you must record the case even if the injured or ill employee does not follow the physician or other licensed healthcare professional's recommendation. 1904.7 B. 6. Is every work-related injury or illness case involving a loss of consciousness recordable? Yes, you must record a work-related injury or illness if the worker becomes unconscious, regardless of the length of time the employee remains unconscious. 1904.7 B. 7. What is a significant diagnosed injury or illness that is recordable under the general criteria even if it does not result in death, days away from work, restricted work or job transfer, medical treatment beyond first aid, or loss of consciousness? Work-related cases involving cancer, chronic irreversible disease, a fractured or cracked bone, or a punctured eardrum must always be recorded under the general criteria at the time of diagnosis by a physician or other licensed healthcare professional. Note to Section 1904.7. OSHA believes that most significant injuries and illnesses will result in one of the criteria listed in Section 1904.7, a death, days away from work, restricted work or job transfer, medical treatment beyond first aid, or loss of consciousness. However, there are some significant injuries, such as a punctured eardrum or a fractured toe or rib, for which neither medical treatment nor work restrictions may be recommended. In addition, there are some significant progressive diseases, such as byssinosis, silicosis, and some types of cancer, for which medical treatment or work restrictions may not be recommended at the time of diagnosis but are likely to be recommended as the disease progresses. OSHA believes that cancer, chronic irreversible diseases, fractured or cracked bones, and punctured eardrums are generally considered significant injuries and illnesses, and must be recorded at the initial diagnosis even if medical treatment or work restrictions are not recommended, or are postponed, in a particular case. 1904.8. Recording criteria for needle stick and sharps injuries. 1904.8 A. Basic requirement. You must record all work-related needle stick injuries and cuts from sharp objects that are contaminated with another person's blood or other potentially infectious material, as defined by 29 CFR 1910.1030. You must enter the case on the OSHA 300 log as an injury. To protect the employee's privacy, you may not enter the employee's name on the OSHA 300 log. See the requirements for privacy cases in paragraphs 1904.29 B6 through 1904.29 B9. 1904.8 B. Implementation. 1904.8 B1. What does other potentially infectious material mean? The term other potentially infectious materials is defined in the OSHA bloodborne pathogens standard at section 1910.1030 B. These materials include 1904.8 B1I and B1-2, human bodily fluids, tissues and organs, and other materials infected with the HIV or hepatitis B, HBV, virus such as laboratory cultures or tissues from experimental animals. 1904.8 B2. Does this mean that I must record all cuts, lacerations, punctures, and scratches? No, you need to record cuts, lacerations, punctures, and scratches only if they are work-related and involve contamination with another person's blood or other potentially infectious material. If the cut, laceration, or scratch involves a clean object, or a contaminant other than blood or other potentially infectious material, you need to record the case only if it meets one or more of the recording criteria in Section 1904.7. 1904.8, b. 3. If I record an injury and the employee is later diagnosed with an infectious bloodborne disease, do I need to update the OSHA 300 log? Yes, you must update the classification of the case on the OSHA 300 log if the case results in death, days away from work, restricted work, or job transfer. You must also update the description to identify the infectious disease and change the classification of the case from an injury to an illness. 1904.8, b. 4. What if one of my employees is splashed or exposed to blood or other potentially infectious material without being cut or scratched? Do I need to record this incident? You need to record such an incident on the OSHA 300 log as an illness if 1904.8, b. 4, I, and b. 4, 2, it results in the diagnosis of a bloodborne illness, such as HIV, hepatitis B, or hepatitis C, or it meets one or more of the recording criteria in Section 1904.7. 1904.9. Recording criteria for cases involving medical removal under OSHA standards. 1904.9, a. Basic requirement. If an employee is medically removed under the medical surveillance requirements of an OSHA standard, you must record the case on the OSHA 300 log. 1904.9, b. Implementation. 1904.9, b. 1. How do I classify medical removal cases on the OSHA 300 log? You must enter each medical removal case on the OSHA 300 log as either a case involving days away from work or a case involving restricted work activity, depending on how you decide to comply with the medical removal requirement. If the medical removal is the result of a chemical exposure, you must enter the case on the OSHA 300 log by checking the poisoning column. 1904.9, b. 2. Do all of OSHA's standards have medical removal provisions? No. Some OSHA standards, such as the standards covering bloodborne pathogens and noise, do not have medical removal provisions. Many OSHA standards that cover specific chemical substances have medical removal provisions. These standards include, but are not limited to, lead, cadmium, methylene chloride, formaldehyde, and benzene. 1904.9, b. 3. Do I have to record a case where I voluntarily removed the employee from exposure before the medical removal criteria in an OSHA standard are met? No. If the case involves voluntary medical removal before the medical removal levels required by an OSHA standard, you do not need to record the case on the OSHA 300 log. 1904.10. Recording criteria for cases involving hearing loss. 1904.10, a. Basic requirement. If an employee's hearing test, audiogram, reveals that the employee has experienced a work-related standard threshold shift, STS, in hearing in one or both ears, and the employee's total hearing level is 25 decibels, dB, or more above audiometric 0, averaged at 2000, 3000, and 4000 Hz, in the same ears as the STS, you must record the case on the OSHA 300 log. 1904.10, b. Implementation. 1904.10, b. 1. What is a standard threshold shift? A standard threshold shift, or STS, is defined in the Occupational Noise Exposure Standard at 29 CFR 1910.95 G10 I as a change in hearing threshold relative to the baseline audiogram for that employee of an average of 10 decibels dB or more at 2000, 3000, and 4000 Hz Hz in one or both ears. 1904.10 b. 2. How do I evaluate the current audiogram to determine whether an employee has an STS and a 25 dB hearing level? 1904.10 b. 2 I and b. 2 STS. If the employee has never previously experienced a recordable hearing loss, you must compare the employee's current audiogram with that employee's baseline audiogram. If the employee has previously experienced a recordable hearing loss, you must compare the employee's current audiogram with the employee's revised baseline audiogram, the audiogram reflecting the employee's previous recordable hearing loss case. 25 dB loss. Audiometric test results reflect the employee's overall hearing ability in comparison to audiometric 0. Therefore, using the employee's current audiogram, you must use the average hearing level at 2000, 3000, and 4000 Hz to determine whether or not the employee's total hearing level is 25 dB or more. 1904.10(b)(3). May I adjust the current audiogram to reflect the effects of aging on hearing? Yes. When you are determining whether an STS has occurred, you may age adjust the employee's current audiogram results by using tables F1 or F2, as appropriate, in Appendix F of 29 CFR 1910.95. You may not use an age adjustment when determining whether the employee's total hearing level is 25 dB or more above audiometric 0. 1904.10(b)(4). Do I have to record the hearing loss if I am going to retest the employee's hearing? No. If you retest the employee's hearing within 30 days of the first test, and the retest does not confirm the recordable STS, you are not required to record the hearing loss case on the OSHA 300 log. If the retest confirms the recordable STS, you must record the hearing loss illness within 7 calendar days of the retest. If subsequent audiometric testing performed under the testing requirements of the Section 1910.95 noise standard indicates that an STS is not persistent, you may erase or line out the recorded entry. 1904.10(b)(6). If a physician or other licensed healthcare professional determines the hearing loss is not work-related, do I still need to record the case? If a physician or other licensed healthcare professional determines, following the rules set out in Section 1904.5, that the hearing loss is not work-related or that occupational noise exposure did not significantly aggravate the hearing loss, you do not have to consider the case work-related or record the case on the OSHA 300 log. 1904.10(b)(7). How do I complete the 300 log for a hearing loss case? When you enter a recordable hearing loss case on the OSHA 300 log, you must check the 300 log column for hearing loss. 1904.11. Recording criteria for work-related tuberculosis cases. 1904.11a. Basic requirement. If any of your employees has been occupationally exposed to anyone with a known case of active tuberculosis, TB, and that employee subsequently develops a tuberculosis infection, as evidenced by a positive skin test or diagnosis by a physician or other licensed healthcare professional, you must record the case on the OSHA 300 log by checking the respiratory condition column. 1904.11(b). Implementation. 1904.11(b)(1). Do I have to record, on the log, a positive TB skin test result obtained at a pre-employment physical? No, you do not have to record it because the employee was not occupationally exposed to a known case of active tuberculosis in your workplace. 1904.11(b)(2). May I line out or erase a recorded TB case if I obtain evidence that the case was not caused by occupational exposure? Yes, you may line out or erase the case from the log under the following circumstances. 1904.11(b)(2) I through (b)(2) 3. The worker is living in a household with a person who has been diagnosed with active TB. The Public Health Department has identified the worker as a contact of an individual with a case of active TB unrelated to the workplace, or a medical investigation shows that the employee's infection was caused by exposure to TB away from work, or proves that the case was not related to the workplace TB exposure. OSHA 1904.29. Forms. 1904.29a. Basic requirement. You must use OSHA 300, 300A, and 301 forms, or equivalent forms, for recordable injuries and illnesses. The OSHA 300 form is called the Log of Work-Related Injuries and Illnesses, the 300A is the Summary of Work-Related Injuries and Illnesses, and the OSHA 301 form is called the Injury and Illness Incident Report. 1904.29b. Implementation. 1904.29b(1). What do I need to do to complete the OSHA 300 log? You must enter information about your business at the top of the OSHA 300 log, enter a 1 or 2 line description for each recordable injury or illness, and summarize this information on the OSHA 300A at the end of the year. 1904.29b(2). What do I need to do to complete the OSHA 301 incident report? You must complete an OSHA 301 incident report form, or an equivalent form, for each recordable injury or illness entered on the OSHA 300 log. 1904.29b(3). How quickly must each injury or illness be recorded? You must enter each recordable injury or illness on the OSHA 300 log and 301 incident report within 7 calendar days of receiving information that a recordable injury or illness has occurred. 1904.29(b)(4). What is an equivalent form? An equivalent form is one that has the same information, is as readable and understandable, and is completed using the same instructions as the OSHA form it replaces. Many employers use an insurance form instead of the OSHA 301 incident report, or supplement an insurance form by adding any additional information required by OSHA. 1904.29(b)(5). May I keep my records on a computer? Yes, if the computer can produce equivalent forms when they are needed, as described under sections 1904.35 and 1904.40, you may keep your records using the computer system. 1904.29(b)(6). Are there situations where I do not put the employee's name on the forms for privacy reasons? Yes, if you have a privacy concern case, you may not enter the employee's name on the OSHA 300 log. Instead, enter privacy case in the space normally used for the employee's name. This will protect the privacy of the injured or ill employee when another employee, a former employee, or an authorized employee representative is provided access to the OSHA 300 log under section 1904.35(b)(2). You must keep a separate, confidential list of the case numbers and employee names for your privacy concern cases so you can update the cases and provide the information to the government if asked to do so. 1904.29(b)(7). How do I determine if an injury or illness is a privacy concern case? You must consider the following injuries or illnesses to be privacy concern cases. 1904.29(b)(7) through (b)(7)(6). An injury or illness to an intimate body part or the reproductive system. An injury or illness resulting from a sexual assault. Mental illnesses. HIV infection, hepatitis, or tuberculosis. Needlestick injuries and cuts from sharp objects that are contaminated with another person's blood or other potentially infectious material. See section 1904.8 for definitions. And other illnesses, if the employee voluntarily requests that his or her name not be entered on the log. 1904.29(b)(8). May I classify any other types of injuries and illnesses as privacy concern cases? No, this is a complete list of all injuries and illnesses considered privacy concern cases for Part 1904 purposes. 1904.29(b)(9). If I have removed the employee's name, but still believe that the employee may be identified from the information on the forms, is there anything else that I can do to further protect the employee's privacy? Yes, if you have a reasonable basis to believe that information describing the privacy concern case may be personally identifiable even though the employee's name has been omitted, you may use discretion in describing the injury or illness on both the OSHA 300 and 301 forms. You must enter enough information to identify the cause of the incident and the general severity of the injury or illness, but you do not need to include details of an intimate or private nature. For example, a sexual assault case could be described as injury from assault, or an injury to a reproductive organ could be described as lower abdominal injury. 1904.29(b)(10). What must I do to protect employee privacy if I wish to provide access to the OSHA Forms 300 and 301 to persons other than government representatives, employees, former employees, or authorized representatives? If you decide to voluntarily disclose the forms to persons other than government representatives, employees, former employees, or authorized representatives, as required by sections 1904.35 and 1904.40, you must remove or hide the employees' names and other personally identifying information, except for the following cases. You may disclose the forms with personally identifying information only. 1904.29(b)(10) through (b)(10)(3) to an auditor or consultant hired by the employer to evaluate the safety and health program, to the extent necessary for processing a claim for workers' compensation or other insurance benefits, or to a public health authority or law enforcement agency for uses and disclosures for which consent, an authorization, or opportunity to agree or object is not required under Department of Health and Human Services standards for privacy of individually identifiable health information, 45 CFR 164.512. 1904 Subpart D. Other OSHA injury and illness record-keeping requirements. OSHA 1904.30. Multiple business establishments. 1904.30a. Basic requirement. You must keep a separate OSHA 300 log for each establishment that is expected to be in operation for 1 year or longer. 1904.30b. Implementation. 1904.30b. 1. Do I need to keep OSHA injury and illness records for short-term establishments, i.e., establishments that will exist for less than a year? Yes, however, you do not have to keep a separate OSHA 300 log for each such establishment. You may keep one OSHA 300 log that covers all of your short-term establishments. You may also include the short-term establishment's recordable injuries and illnesses on an OSHA 300 log that covers short-term establishments for individual company divisions or geographic regions. 1904.30b. 2. May I keep the records for all of my establishments at my headquarters location or at some other central location? Yes, you may keep the records for an establishment at your headquarters or other central location if you can. 1904.30b. 2. I and b. 2. Transmit information about the injuries and illnesses from the establishment to the central location within 7 calendar days of receiving information that a recordable injury or illness has occurred, and produce and send the records from the central location to the establishment within the timeframes required by sections 1904.35 and 1904.40 when you are required to provide records to a government representative, employees, former employees or employee representatives. 1904.30b. 3. Some of my employees work at several different locations or do not work at any of my establishments at all. How do I record cases for these employees? You must link each of your employees with one of your establishments, for record-keeping purposes. You must record the injury and illness on the OSHA 300 log of the injured or ill employee's establishment, or on an OSHA 300 log that covers that employee's short-term establishment. 1904.30b. 4. How do I record an injury or illness when an employee of one of my establishments is injured or becomes ill while visiting or working at another of my establishments, or while working away from any of my establishments? If the injury or illness occurs at one of your establishments, you must record the injury or illness on the OSHA 300 log of the establishment at which the injury or illness occurred. If the employee is injured or becomes ill and is not at one of your establishments, you must record the case on the OSHA 300 log at the establishment at which the employee normally works. OSHA 1904.31. Covered employees. 1904.31a. Basic requirement. You must record on the OSHA 300 log the recordable injuries and illnesses of all employees on your payroll, whether they are labor, executive, hourly, salary, part-time, seasonal, or migrant workers. You also must record the recordable injuries and illnesses that occur to employees who are not on your payroll if you supervise these employees on a day-to-day basis. If your business is organized as a sole proprietorship or partnership, the owner or partners are not considered employees for record-keeping purposes. 1904.31b. Implementation. 1904.31b. 1. If a self-employed person is injured or becomes ill while doing work at my business, do I need to record the injury or illness? No, self-employed individuals are not covered by the OSHA Act or this regulation. 1904.31b. 2. If I obtain employees from a temporary help service, employee leasing service, or personnel supply service, do I have to record an injury or illness occurring to one of those employees? You must record these injuries and illnesses if you supervise these employees on a day-to-day basis. 1904.31b. 3. If an employee in my establishment is a contractor's employee, must I record an injury or illness occurring to that employee? If the contractor's employee is under the day-to-day supervision of the contractor is responsible for recording the injury or illness. If you supervise the contractor employee's work on a day-to-day basis, you must record the injury or illness. 1904.31b. 4. Must the personnel supply service, temporary help service, employee leasing service, or contractor also record the injuries or illnesses occurring to temporary, leased or contract employees that I supervise on a day-to-day basis? No, you and the temporary help service, employee leasing service, personnel supply service, or contractor should coordinate your efforts to make sure that each injury and illness is recorded only once, either on your OSHA 300 log, if you provide day-to-day supervision, or on the other employer's OSHA 300 log, if that company provides day-to-day supervision. OSHA 1904.32 Annual Summary. 1904.32 A. Basic Requirement. At the end of each calendar year, you must 1904.32 A1 through A4 review the OSHA 300 log to verify that the entries are complete and accurate, and correct any deficiencies identified. Create an annual summary of injuries and illnesses recorded on the OSHA 300 log. Certify the summary, and post the annual summary. 1904.32 B. Implementation. 1904.32 B1. How extensively do I have to review the OSHA 300 log entries at the end of the year? You must review the entries as extensively as necessary to make sure that they are complete and correct. 1904.32 B2. How do I complete the annual summary? You must 1904.32 B2 I through B2 3 total the columns on the OSHA 300 log. If you had no recordable cases, enter zeros for each column total, and enter the calendar year covered, the company's name, establishment address, annual average number of employees covered by the OSHA 300 log, and the total hours worked by all employees covered by the OSHA 300 log. If you are using an equivalent form other than the OSHA 300 as summary form, as permitted under Section 1904.29 B4, the summary you use must also include the employee access and employer penalty statements found on the OSHA 300 a summary form. 1904.32 B3. How do I certify the annual summary? A company executive must certify that he or she has examined the OSHA 300 log and that he or she reasonably believes, based on his or her knowledge of the process by which the information was recorded, that the annual summary is correct and complete. 1904.32 B4. Who is considered a company executive? The company executive who certifies the log must be one of the following persons. 1904.32 B4 I through B4 an owner of the company, only if the company is a sole proprietorship or partnership, an officer of the corporation, the highest ranking company official working at the establishment, or the immediate supervisor of the highest ranking company official working at the establishment. 1904.32 B5. How do I post the annual summary? You must post a copy of the annual summary in each establishment in a conspicuous place or places where notices to employees are customarily posted. You must ensure that the posted annual summary is not altered, defaced, or covered by other material. 1904.32 B6. When do I have to post the annual summary? You must post the summary no later than February 1st of the year following the year covered by the records and keep the posting in place until April 30th. OSHA 1904.33 Retention and Update. 1904.33 A. Basic Requirement. You must save the OSHA 300 log, the privacy case list, if one exists, the annual summary, and the OSHA 301 incident report forms for 5 years following the end of the calendar year that these records cover. 1904.33 B. Implementation. 1904.33 B1. Do I have to update the OSHA 300 log during the 5-year storage period? Yes, during the storage period, you must update your stored OSHA 300 logs to include newly discovered recordable injuries or illnesses and to show any changes that have occurred in the classification of previously recorded injuries and illnesses. If the description or outcome of a case changes, you must remove or line out the original entry and enter the new information. 1904.33 B2. Do I have to update the annual summary? No, you are not required to update the annual summary, but you may do so if you wish. 1904.33 B3. Do I have to update the OSHA 301 incident reports? No, you are not required to update the OSHA 301 incident reports, but you may do so if you wish. OSHA 1904.34 Change in business ownership. If your business changes ownership, you are responsible for recording and reporting work-related injuries and illnesses only for that period of the year during which you owned the establishment. You must transfer the Part 1904 records to the new owner. The new owner must save all records of the establishment kept by the prior owner, as required by Section 1904.33 of this part, but need not update or correct the records of the prior owner. OSHA 1904.35, Employee Involvement. 1904.35, A Basic Requirement. Your employees and their representatives must be involved in the record-keeping system in several ways. 1904.35, A1 through A3, you must inform each employee of how he or she is to report a work-related injury or illness to you. You must provide employees with the information described in paragraph B1(3) of this section. You must provide access to your injury and illness records for your employees and their representatives as described in paragraph B2 of this section. 1904.35, B. Implementation. 1904.35, B1. What must I do to make sure that employees report work-related injuries and illnesses to me? 1904.35, B1(I) and B1(2). You must establish a reasonable procedure for employees to report work-related injuries and illnesses promptly and accurately. A procedure is not reasonable if it would deter or discourage a reasonable employee from accurately reporting a workplace injury or illness. You must inform each employee of your procedure for reporting work-related injuries and illnesses. 1904.35, B1(3). You must inform each employee that 1904.35, B1(3), A, and B. Employees have the right to report work-related injuries and illnesses, and employers are prohibited from discharging or in any manner discriminating against employees for reporting work-related injuries or illnesses, and 1904.35, B1(4), you must not discharge or in any manner discriminate against any employee for reporting a work-related injury or illness. 1904.35, B2. Do I have to give my employees and their representatives access to the OSHA injury and illness records? Yes, your employees, former employees, their personal representatives, and their authorized employee representatives have the right to access the OSHA injury and illness records, with some limitations, as discussed below. 1904.35, B2(I) and B2(2). Who is an authorized employee representative? An authorized employee representative is an authorized collective bargaining agent of employees. Who is a personal representative of an employee or former employee? A personal representative is 1904.35, B2(2), and B. Any person that the employee or former employee designates as such, in writing, or the legal representative of a deceased or legally incapacitated employee or former employee. 1904.35, B2(3). If an employee or representative asks for access to the OSHA 300 log, when do I have to provide it? When an employee, former employee, personal representative, or authorized employee representative asks for copies of your current or stored OSHA 300 logs for an establishment the employee or former employee has worked in, you must give the requester a copy of the relevant OSHA 300 logs by the end of the next business day. 1904.35, B2(4). May I remove the names of the employees or any other information from the OSHA 300 log before I give copies to an employee, former employee, or employee representative? No, you must leave the names on the 300 log. However, to protect the privacy of injured and ill employees, you may not record the employee's name on the OSHA 300 log for certain privacy concern cases, as specified in Section 1904.29, B6 through 9. 1904.35, B2(v). If an employee or representative asks for access to the OSHA 301 incident report, when do I have to provide it? 1904.35, B2(v), A, and B. When an employee, former employee, or personal representative asks for a copy of the OSHA 301 incident report describing an injury or illness to that employee or former employee, you must give the requester a copy of the OSHA 301 incident report containing that information by the end of the next business day. 1904.35, B2(v)(b). When an authorized employee representative asks for copies of the OSHA 301 incident reports for an establishment where the agent represents employees under a collective bargaining agreement, you must give copies of those forms to the authorized employee representative within 7 calendar days. You are only required to give the authorized employee representative information from the OSHA 301 incident report section titled "Tell us about the case." You must remove all other information from the copy of the OSHA 301 incident report or the equivalent substitute form that you give to the authorized employee representative. 1904.35, B2, 6. May I charge for the copies? No, you may not charge for these copies the first time they are provided. However, if one of the designated persons asks for additional copies, you may assess a reasonable charge for retrieving and copying the records. OSHA 1904.36, Prohibition against discrimination. In addition to Section 1904.35, Section 11(c) of the OSHA Act also prohibits you from discriminating against an employee for reporting a work-related fatality, injury, or illness. That provision of the Act also protects the employee who files a safety and health complaint, asks for access to the Part 1904 records, or otherwise exercises any rights afforded by the OSHA Act. OSHA 1904.37, State Record-Keeping Regulations. 1904.37, Basic Requirement. Some states operate their own OSHA programs, under the authority of a state plan as approved by OSHA. States operating OSHA-approved state plans must have occupational injury and illness recording and reporting requirements that are substantially identical to the requirements in this part. See 29 CFR 1902.3, J, 29 CFR 1902.7, and 29 CFR 1956.10, I. 1904.37, B, Implementation. 1904.37, B1, State plan states must have the same requirements as federal OSHA for determining which injuries and illnesses are recordable and how they are recorded. 1904.37, B2, for other Part 1904 provisions, for example, industry exemptions, reporting of fatalities and hospitalizations, record retention, or employee involvement, state plan state requirements may be more stringent than or supplemental to the federal requirements, but because of the unique nature of the National Record-Keeping Program, states must consult with and obtain approval of any such requirements. 1904.37, B3, although state and local government employees are not covered federally, all state plan states must provide coverage, and must develop injury and illness statistics, for these workers. State plan recording and reporting requirements for state and local government entities may differ from those for the private sector but must meet the requirements of paragraphs 1904.37, B1, and B2. 1904.37, B4, a state plan state may not issue a variance to a private sector employer and must recognize all variances issued by federal OSHA. 1904.37, B5, a state plan state may only grant an injury and illness recording and reporting variance to a state or local government employer within the state after obtaining approval to grant the variance from federal OSHA. OSHA 1904.38, Variances from the Record-Keeping Rule. 1904.38, A, Basic Requirement. If you wish to keep records in a different manner from the manner prescribed by the Part 1904 regulations, you may submit a variance petition to the Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health, U.S. Department of Labor, Washington, D.C. 20210. You can obtain a variance only if you can show that your alternative record-keeping system, 1904.38, A1 through A3, collects the same information as this part requires, meets the purposes of the Act, and does not interfere with the administration of the Act. 1904.38, B, Implementation. 1904.38, B1, what do I need to include in my variance petition? You must include the following items in your petition. 1904.38, B1, I through B1, 7, your name and address, a list of the states where the variance would be used, the addresses of the business establishments involved, a description of why you are seeking a variance, a description of the different record-keeping procedures you propose to use, a description of how your proposed procedures will collect the same information as would be collected by this part and achieve the purpose of the Act, and a statement that you have informed your employees of the petition by giving them or their authorized representative a copy of the petition and by posting a statement summarizing the petition in the same way as notices are posted under Section 1903.2, A. 1904.38, B2, how will the Assistant Secretary handle my variance petition? The Assistant Secretary will take the following steps to process your variance petition. 1904.38, B2, I through B2, 4, the Assistant Secretary will offer your employees and their authorized representatives an opportunity to submit written data, views, and arguments about your variance petition. The Assistant Secretary may allow the public to comment on your variance petition by publishing the petition in the Federal Register. If the petition is published, the notice will establish a public comment period and may include a schedule for a public meeting on the petition. After reviewing your variance petition and any comments from your employees and the public, the Assistant Secretary will decide whether or not your proposed record-keeping procedures will meet the purposes of the Act, will not otherwise interfere with the Act, and will provide the same information as the Part 1904 regulations provide. If your procedures meet these criteria, the Assistant Secretary may grant the variance subject to such conditions as he or she finds appropriate. If the Assistant Secretary grants your variance petition, OSHA will publish a notice in the Federal Register to announce the variance. The notice will include the practices the variance allows you to use, any conditions that apply, and the reasons for allowing the variance. 1904.38(b)(3) If I apply for a variance, may I use my proposed record-keeping procedures while the Assistant Secretary is processing the variance petition? No, alternative record-keeping practices are only allowed after the variance is approved. You must comply with the Part 1904 regulations while the Assistant Secretary is reviewing your variance petition. 1904.38(b)(4) If I have already been cited by OSHA for not following the Part 1904 regulations, will my variance petition have any effect on the citation and penalty? No. In addition, the Assistant Secretary may elect not to review your variance petition if it includes an element for which you have been cited and the citation is still under review by a court, an administrative law judge, ALJ, or the OSHA Review Commission. 1904.38(b)(5) If I receive a variance, may the Assistant Secretary revoke the variance at a later date? Yes, the Assistant Secretary may revoke your variance if he or she has good cause. The procedures revoking a variance will follow the same process as OSHA uses for reviewing variance petitions, as outlined in paragraph 1904.38(b)(2). Except in cases of willfulness or where necessary for public safety, the Assistant Secretary will 1904.38(b)(5)(i) and (b)(5)(2) notify you in writing of the facts or conduct that may warrant revocation of your variance, and provide you, your employees, and authorized employee representatives with an opportunity to participate in the revocation procedures. 1904 Subpart E. Reporting fatality, injury, and illness information to the government. OSHA 1904.39. Reporting fatalities, hospitalizations, amputations, and losses of an eye as a result of work-related incidents to OSHA. 1904.39a. Basic requirement. 1904.39a(1) Within 8 hours after the death of any employee as a result of a work-related incident, you must report the fatality to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, U.S. Department of Labor. 1904.39a(2) Within 24 hours after the inpatient hospitalization of one or more employees or an employee's amputation or an employee's loss of an eye as a result of a work-related incident, you must report the inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye to OSHA. 1904.39a(3) You must report the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye using one of the following methods. 1904.39a(3)(i) through a(3)(3) by telephone or in person to the OSHA area office that is nearest to the site of the incident. By telephone to the OSHA toll-free central telephone number 1-800-321-OSHA 1-800-321-6742. By electronic submission using the reporting application located on OSHA's public website at www.osha.gov. 1904.39b. Implementation. 1904.39b(1) If the area office is closed, may I report the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye by leaving a message on OSHA's answering machine, faxing the area office, or sending an email? No. If the area office is closed, you must report the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye using either the 800 number or the reporting application located on OSHA's public website at www.osha.gov. 1904.39b(2) What information do I need to give to OSHA about the inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye? You must give OSHA the following information for each fatality: inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye. 1904.39, B2, I, through B2, 8, the establishment name, the location of the work-related incident, the time of the work-related incident, the type of reportable event, i.e., fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye, the number of employees who suffered a fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye, the names of the employees who suffered a fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye, your contact person and his or her phone number, and a brief description of the work-related incident. 1904.39, B3, do I have to report the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye if it resulted from a motor vehicle accident on a public street or highway? If the motor vehicle accident occurred in a construction work zone, you must report the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye. If the motor vehicle accident occurred on a public street or highway, but not in a construction work zone, you do not have to report the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye to OSHA. However, the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye must be recorded on your OSHA injury and illness records, if you are required to keep such records. 1904.39, B4, do I have to report the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye if it occurred on a commercial or public transportation system? No, you do not have to report the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye to OSHA if it occurred on a commercial or public transportation system, e.g., airplane, train, subway, or bus. However, the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye must be recorded on your OSHA injury and illness records, if you are required to keep such records. 1904.39, B5, do I have to report a work-related fatality or inpatient hospitalization caused by a heart attack? Yes, your local OSHA area office director will decide whether to investigate the event, depending on the circumstances of the heart attack. 1904.39, B6, what if the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye does not occur during or right after the work-related incident? You must only report a fatality to OSHA if the fatality occurs within 30 days of the work-related incident. For an inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye, you must only report the event to OSHA if it occurs within 24 hours of the work-related incident. However, the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye must be recorded on your OSHA injury and illness records, if you are required to keep such records. 1904.39, B7, what if I don't learn about a reportable fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye right away? If you do not learn about a reportable fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye at the time it takes place, you must make the report to OSHA within the following time period after the fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye is reported to you or to any of your agents: 8 hours for a fatality, and 24 hours for an inpatient hospitalization, an amputation, or a loss of an eye. 1904.39, B8, what if I don't learn right away that the reportable fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye was the result of a work-related incident? If you do not learn right away that the reportable fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye was the result of a work-related incident, you must make the report to OSHA within the following time period after you or any of your agents learn that the reportable fatality, inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or loss of an eye was the result of a work-related incident: 8 hours for a fatality, and 24 hours for an inpatient hospitalization, an amputation, or a loss of an eye. 1904.39, B9, how does OSHA define inpatient hospitalization? OSHA defines inpatient hospitalization as a formal admission to the inpatient service of a hospital or clinic for care or treatment. 1904.39, B10, do I have to report an inpatient hospitalization that involves only observation or diagnostic testing? No, you do not have to report an inpatient hospitalization that involves only observation or diagnostic testing. You must only report to OSHA each inpatient hospitalization that involves care or treatment. 1904.39 B. 11. How does OSHA define amputation? An amputation is the traumatic loss of a limb or other external body part. Amputations include a part, such as a limb or appendage, that has been severed, cut off, amputated, either completely or partially, fingertip amputations with or without bone loss, medical amputations resulting from irreparable damage, amputations of body parts that have since been reattached. Amputations do not include avulsions, enucleations, deglovings, scalpings, severed ears, or broken or chipped teeth. 1904.40 Providing records to government representatives. 1904.40 A. Basic requirement. When an authorized government representative asks for the records you keep under Part 1904, you must provide copies of the records within 4 business hours. 1904.40 B. Implementation. 1904.40 B. 1. What government representatives have the right to get copies of my Part 1904 records? The government representatives authorized to receive the records are 1904.40 B1 I through B1 3 a representative of the Secretary of Labor conducting an inspection or investigation under the Act, a representative of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, including the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health NIOSH, conducting an investigation under Section 20B of the Act, or a representative of a state agency responsible for administering a state plan approved under Section 18 of the Act. 1904.40 B2. Do I have to produce the records within 4 hours if my records are kept at a location in a different time zone? OSHA will consider your response to be timely if you give the records to the government representative within 4 business hours of the request. If you maintain the records at a location in a different time zone, you may use the business hours of the establishment at which the records are located when calculating the deadline. 1904.41 Electronic submission of employer identification number, EIN, and injury and illness records to OSHA. 1904.41 A. Basic requirements. 1904.41 A1. Annual electronic submission of information from OSHA Form 300, a summary of work-related injuries and illnesses. 1904.41 A1 I. If your establishment had 20 to 249 employees at any time during the previous calendar year, and your establishment is classified in an industry listed in Appendix A to Subpart E of this part, then you must electronically submit information from OSHA Form 300, a summary of work-related injuries and illnesses to OSHA or OSHA's designee. You must submit the information once a year, no later than the date listed in paragraph C of this section of the year after the calendar year covered by the form. 1904.41 A1 2. If your establishment had 250 or more employees at any time during the previous calendar year, and this part requires your establishment to keep records, then you must electronically submit information from OSHA Form 300, a summary of work-related injuries and illnesses to OSHA or OSHA's designee. You must submit the information once a year, no later than the date listed in paragraph C of this section of the year after the calendar year covered by the form. 1904.41 A2. Annual electronic submission of information from OSHA Form 300, log of work-related injuries and illnesses, and OSHA Form 301, injury and illness incident report by establishments with 100 or more employees in designated industries. If your establishment had 100 or more employees at any time during the previous calendar year, and your establishment is classified in an industry listed in Appendix B to Subpart E of this part, then you must electronically submit information from OSHA Forms 300 and 301 to OSHA or OSHA's designee. You must submit the information once a year, no later than the date listed in paragraph C of this section of the year after the calendar year covered by the forms. 1904.41 A3. Electronic submission of Part 1904 records upon notification. Upon notification, you must electronically submit the requested information from your Part 1904 records to OSHA or OSHA's designee. 1904.41 A4. Electronic submission of the employer identification number, EIN. For each establishment that is subject to these reporting requirements, you must provide the EIN used by the establishment. 1904.41 B. Implementation. 1904.41 B1. Does every employer have to routinely make an annual electronic submission of information from Part 1904 injury and illness record-keeping forms to OSHA? No, only 3 categories of employers must routinely submit information from these forms. The first category is establishments that had 20 to 249 employees at any time during the previous calendar year, and are classified in an industry listed in Appendix A to this subpart. Establishments in this category must submit the required information from Form 300A to OSHA once a year. The second category is establishments that had 250 or more employees at any time during the previous calendar year, and are required by this part to keep records. Establishments in this category must submit the required information from Form 300A to OSHA once a year. The third category is establishments that had 100 or more employees at any time during the previous calendar year, and are classified in an industry listed in Appendix B to this subpart. Establishments in this category must also submit the required information from Forms 300 and 301 to OSHA once a year, in addition to the required information from Form 300A. Employers in these 3 categories must submit the required information by the date listed in paragraph C of this section of the year after the calendar year covered by the form, for example, 2024 for the 2023 forms. If your establishment is not in any of these 3 categories, then you must submit the information to OSHA only if OSHA notifies you to do so for an individual data collection. 1904.41(b)(2). Do part-time, seasonal, or temporary workers count as employees in the criteria for number of employees in paragraph A of this section? Yes, each individual employed in the establishment at any time during the calendar year counts as one employee, including full-time, part-time, seasonal, and temporary workers. 1904.41(b)(3). How will OSHA notify me that I must submit information as part of an individual data collection under paragraph A(3) of this section? OSHA will notify you by mail if you will have to submit information as part of an individual data collection under paragraph A(3). OSHA will also announce individual data collections through publication in the Federal Register and the OSHA newsletter, and announcements on the OSHA website. If you are an employer who must routinely submit the information, then OSHA will not notify you about your routine submittal. 1904.41(b)(4). When do I have to submit the information? If you are required to submit information under paragraph A(1) or 2 of this section, then you must submit the information once a year, by the date listed in paragraph C of this section of the year after the calendar year covered by the form, for example, 2019 for the 2018 form. If you are submitting information because OSHA notified you to submit information as part of an individual data collection under paragraph A(3) of this section, then you must submit the information as specified in the notification. 1904.41(b)(5). How do I submit the information? You must submit the information electronically. OSHA will provide a secure website for the electronic submission of information. For individual data collections under paragraph A(3) of this section, OSHA will include the website's location in the notification for the data collection. 1904.41(b)(6). Do I have to submit information if my establishment is partially exempt from keeping OSHA injury and illness records? If you are partially exempt from keeping injury and illness records under sections 1904.1 and or 1904.2, then you do not have to routinely submit information under paragraphs A(1) and 2 of this section. You will have to submit information under paragraph A(3) of this section if OSHA informs you in writing that it will collect injury and illness information from you. If you receive such a notification, then you must keep the injury and illness records required by this part and submit information as directed. 1904.41(b)(7). Do I have to submit information if I am located in a state plan state? Yes, the requirements apply to employers located in state plan states. 1904.41(b)(8). May an enterprise or corporate office electronically submit information for its establishments? Yes, if your enterprise or corporate office had ownership of or control over one or more establishments required to submit information under paragraph A of this section, then the enterprise or corporate office may collect and electronically submit the information for the establishments. 1904.41(b)(9). If I have to submit information under paragraph A(2) of this section, do I have to submit all of the information from the record-keeping forms? No, you are required to submit all of the information from the forms except the following: 1904.41, B, 9, and the second, Log of Work-Related Injuries and Illnesses, OSHA Form 300 Employee Name, Column B. Injury and Illness Incident Report, OSHA Form 301 Employee Name, Field 1, Employee Address, Field 2, Name of Physician or other healthcare professional, Field 6, Facility Name and Address if treatment was given away from the worksite, Field 7. 1904.41, B, 10, my company uses numbers or codes to identify our establishments. May I use numbers or codes as the establishment name in my submission? Yes, you may use numbers or codes as the establishment name. However, the submission must include a legal company name, either as part of the establishment name or separately as the company name. 1904.41, C, reporting dates. Establishments that are required to submit under paragraph A, 1, or 2 of this section must submit all of the required information by March 2nd of the year after the calendar year covered by the forms, for example, by March 2nd, 2024, for the forms covering 2023. OSHA 1904.42, Request from the Bureau of Labor Statistics for data. 1904.42, A, Basic Requirement. If you receive a Survey of Occupational Injuries and Illnesses form from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, or a BLS designee, you must promptly complete the form and return it following the instructions contained on the survey form. 1904.42, B, Implementation. 1904.42, B, 1, does every employer have to send data to the BLS? No, each year, the BLS sends injury and illness survey forms to randomly selected employers and uses the information to create the nation's occupational injury and illness statistics. In any year, some employers will receive a BLS survey form and others will not. You do not have to send injury and illness data to the BLS unless you receive a survey form. 1904.42, B, 2, if I get a survey form from the BLS, what do I have to do? If you receive a Survey of Occupational Injuries and Illnesses form from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, or a BLS designee, you must promptly complete the form and return it, following the instructions contained on the survey form. 1904.42, B, 3, do I have to respond to a BLS survey form if I am normally exempt from keeping OSHA injury and illness records? Yes. Even if you are exempt from keeping injury and illness records under Section 1904.1 to Section 1904.3, the BLS may inform you in writing that it will be collecting injury and illness information from you in the coming year. If you receive such a letter, you must keep the injury and illness records required by Section 1904.5 to Section 1904.15 and make a survey report for the year covered by the survey. 1904.42, B, 4, do I have to answer the BLS survey form if I am located in a state plan state? Yes, all employers who receive a survey form must respond to the survey, even those in state plan states. Appendix A to Subpart E of Part 1904, Designated Industries for Section 1904.41, A, 1, I, Annual Electronic Submission of Information from OSHA Form 300. A summary of work-related injuries and illnesses by establishments with 20 to 249 employees in designated industries. 11. Agriculture, forestry, fishing, and hunting. 22. Utilities. 23. Construction. 31 to 33. Manufacturing. 42. Wholesale trade. 4413. Automotive parts, accessories, and tire stores. 4421. Furniture stores. 4422. Home furnishing stores. 4441. Building material and supplies dealers. 4442. Lawn and garden equipment and supply stores. 4451. Grocery stores. 4452. Specialty food stores. 4522. Department stores. 4523. General merchandise stores, including warehouse clubs and supercenters. 4533. Used merchandise stores. 4542. Vending machine operators. 4543. Direct selling establishments. 4811. Scheduled air transportation. 4841. General freight trucking. 4842. Specialized freight trucking. 4851. Urban transit systems. 4852. Interurban and rural bus transportation. 4853. Taxi and limousine service. 4854. School and employee bus transportation. 4855. Charter bus industry. 4859. Other transit and ground passenger transportation. 4871. Scenic and sightseeing transportation, land. 4881. Support activities for air transportation. 4882. Support activities for rail transportation. 4883. Support activities for water transportation. 4884. Support activities for road transportation. 4889. Other support activities for transportation. 4911. Postal service. 4921. Couriers and express delivery services. 4922. Local messengers and local delivery. 4931. Warehousing and storage. 5152. Cable and other subscription programming. 5311. Lessors of real estate. 5321. Automotive equipment rental and leasing. 5322. Consumer goods rental. 5323. General rental centers. 5617. Services to buildings and dwellings. 5621. Waste collection. 5622. Waste treatment and disposal. 5629. Remediation and other waste management services. 6219. Other ambulatory healthcare services. 6221. General medical and surgical hospitals. 6222. Psychiatric and substance abuse hospitals. 6223. Specialty, except psychiatric and substance abuse, hospitals. 6231. Nursing care facilities, skilled nursing facilities. 6232. Residential intellectual and developmental disability, mental health, and substance abuse facilities. 6233. Continuing care retirement communities and assisted living facilities for the elderly. 6239. Other residential care facilities. 6242. Community food and housing, and emergency and other relief services. 6243. Vocational rehabilitation services. 7111. Performing arts companies. 7112. Spectator sports. 7121. Museums, historical sites, and similar institutions. 7131. Amusement parks and arcades. 7132. Gambling industries. 7211. Traveler accommodation. 7212. RV, recreational vehicle, parks and recreational camps. 7223. Special food services. 8113. Commercial and industrial machinery and equipment, except automotive and electronic, repair and maintenance. 8123. Dry cleaning and laundry services. Appendix B to Subparty of Part 1904V Designated Industries for Section 1904.41, and 2. Annual electronic submission of information from OSHA Form 300 Log of Work-Related Injuries and Illnesses and OSHA Form 301 Injury and Illness Incident Report by establishments with 100 or more employees in designated industries. 1111. Oilseed and grain farming. 1112. Vegetable and melon farming. 1113. Fruit and tree nut farming. 1114. Greenhouse, nursery, and floriculture production. 1119. Other crop farming. 1121. Cattle ranching and farming. 1122. Hog and pig farming. 1123. Poultry and egg production. 1129. Other animal production. 1133. Logging. 1141. Fishing. 1142. Hunting and trapping. 1151. Support activities for crop production. 1152. Support activities for animal production. 1153. Support activities for forestry. 2213. Water, sewage, and other systems. 2381. Foundation, structure, and building exterior contractors. 3111. Animal food manufacturing. 3113. Sugar and confectionery product manufacturing. 3114. Fruit and vegetable preserving and specialty food manufacturing. 3115. Dairy product manufacturing. 3116. Animal slaughtering and processing. 3117. Seafood product preparation and packaging. 3118. Bakeries and tortilla manufacturing. 3119. Other food manufacturing. 3121. Beverage manufacturing. 3161. Leather and hide tanning and finishing. 3162. Footwear manufacturing. 3211. Sawmills and wood preservation. 3212. Veneer, plywood, and engineered wood product manufacturing. 3219. Other wood product manufacturing. 3261. Plastics product manufacturing. 3262. Rubber product manufacturing. 3271. Clay product and refractory manufacturing. 3272. Glass and glass product manufacturing. 3273. Cement and concrete product manufacturing. 3279. Other non-metallic mineral product manufacturing. 3312. Steel product manufacturing from purchased steel. 3314. Non-ferrous metal, except aluminum, production and processing. 3315. Foundries. 3321. Forging and stamping. 3323. Architectural and structural metals manufacturing. 3324. Boiler, tank, and shipping container manufacturing. 3325. Hardware manufacturing. 3326. Spring and wire product manufacturing. 3327. Machine shops, turn product, and screw, nut, and bolt manufacturing. 3328. Coating, engraving, heat treating, and allied activities. 3331. Agriculture, construction, and mining machinery manufacturing. 3335. Metalworking machinery manufacturing. 3361. Motor vehicle manufacturing. 3362. Motor vehicle body and trailer manufacturing. 3363. Motor vehicle parts manufacturing. 3366. Ship and boat building. 3371. Household and institutional furniture and kitchen cabinet manufacturing. 3372. Office furniture, including fixtures, manufacturing. 3379. Other furniture-related product manufacturing. 4231. Motor vehicle and motor vehicle parts and supplies merchant wholesalers. 4233. Lumber and other construction materials merchant wholesalers. 4235. Metal and mineral, except petroleum, merchant wholesalers. 4239. Miscellaneous durable goods merchant wholesalers. 4244. Grocery and related product merchant wholesalers. 4248. Beer, wine, and distilled alcoholic beverage merchant wholesalers. 4413. Automotive parts, accessories, and tire stores. 4422. Home furnishing stores. 4441. Building material and supplies dealers. 4442. Lawn and garden equipment and supply stores. 4451. Grocery stores. 4522. Department stores. 4523. General merchandise stores, including warehouse clubs and supercenters. 4533. Used merchandise stores. 4543. Direct selling establishments. 4811. Scheduled air transportation. 4841. General freight trucking. 4842. Specialized freight trucking. 4851. Urban transit systems. 4852. Interurban and rural bus transportation. 4853. Taxi and limousine service. 4854. School and employee bus transportation. 4859. Other transit and ground passenger transportation. 4871. Scenic and sightseeing transportation, land. 4881. Support activities for air transportation. 4883. Support activities for water transportation. 4889. Other support activities for transportation. 4911. Postal service. 4921. Couriers and express delivery services. 4931. Warehousing and storage. 5322. Consumer goods rental. 5621. Waste collection. 5622. Waste treatment and disposal. 6219. Other ambulatory healthcare services. 6221. General medical and surgical hospitals. 6222. Psychiatric and substance abuse hospitals. 6223. Specialty, except psychiatric and substance abuse, hospitals. 6231. Nursing care facilities, skilled nursing facilities. 6232. Residential intellectual and developmental disability, mental health, and substance abuse facilities. 6233. Continuing care retirement communities and assisted living facilities for the elderly. 6239. Other residential care facilities. 6243. Vocational rehabilitation services. 7111. Performing arts companies. 7112. Spectator sports. 7131. Amusement parks and arcades. 7211. Traveler accommodation. 7212. RV, recreational vehicle, parks and recreational camps. 7223. Special food services. 1904 Subpart F. Transition from the former rule. 1904.43. Summary and posing of the 2001 data. 1904.43. A. Basic requirement. If you were required to keep OSHA 200 logs in 2001, you must post a 2000 annual summary from the OSHA 200 log of occupational injuries and illnesses for each establishment. 1904.43. B. Implementation. 1904.43. B.1. What do I have to include in the summary? 1904.43. B.1. I through B.1. 2. You must include a copy of the totals from the 2001 OSHA 200 log and the following information from that form: the calendar year covered, your company name, the name and address of the establishment, and the certification signature, title, and date. If no injuries or illnesses occurred at your establishment in 2001, you must enter zeros on the totals line and post the 2001 summary. 1904.43. B.2. When am I required to summarize and post the 2001 information? 1904.43. B.2. I and B.2. You must complete the summary by February 1, 2002, and you must post a copy of the summary in each establishment in a conspicuous place or places where notices to employees are customarily posted. You must ensure that the summary is not altered, defaced, or covered by other material. 1904.43. B.3. You must post the 2001 summary from February 1, 2002 to March 1, 2002. OSHA 1904.44. Retention and updating of old forms. You must save your copies of the OSHA 200 and 101 forms for 5 years following the year to which they relate and continue to provide access to the data as though these forms were the OSHA 300 and 301 forms. You are not required to update your old 200 and 101 forms. OSHA 1904.45. OMB control numbers under the Paperwork Reduction Act. The following sections each contain a collection of information requirement which has been approved by the Office of Management and Budget under the control number listed. 29 CFR Citation. OMB Control No. 1904.4 to 35, 1218 to 0176, 1904.39 to 41, 1218 to 0176, 1904.42, 1220 to 0045, 1904.43 to 44, 1218 to 0176, 1904 Subpart G, Definitions. 1904.46, Definitions. The Act. The Act means the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, 29 U.S.C. 651 et.seq. The definitions contained in Section 3 of the Act, 29 U.S.C. 652, and related interpretations apply to such terms when used in this Part 1904. Establishment. An establishment is a single physical location where business is conducted or where services or industrial operations are performed. For activities where employees do not work at a single physical location, such as construction, transportation, communications, electric, gas and sanitary services, and similar operations, the establishment is represented by main or branch offices, terminals, stations, etc. that either supervise such activities or are the base from which personnel carry out these activities. 1904.46, 1. Can one business location include two or more establishments? Normally, one business location has only one establishment. Under limited conditions, the employer may consider two or more separate businesses that share a single location to be separate establishments. An employer may divide one location into two or more establishments only when, 1904.46, 1, I, through 4, each of the establishments represents a distinctly separate business. Each business is engaged in a different economic activity. No one industry description in the North American Industry Classification System, 2007, codes applies to the joint activities of the establishments, and separate reports are routinely prepared for each establishment on the number of employees, their wages and salaries, sales or receipts, and other business information. For example, if an employer operates a construction company at the same location as a lumber yard, the employer may consider each business to be a separate establishment. 1904.46, 2. Can an establishment include more than one physical location? Yes, but only under certain conditions. An employer may combine two or more physical locations into a single establishment only when 1904.46, 2, I, through 3, the employer operates the locations as a single business operation under common management. The locations are all located in close proximity to each other, and the employer keeps one set of business records for the locations, such as records on the number of employees, their wages and salaries, sales or receipts, and other kinds of business information. For example, one manufacturing establishment might include the main plant, a warehouse a few blocks away, and an administrative services building across the street. 1904.46, 3. If an employee telecommutes from home, is his or her home considered a separate establishment? No. For employees who telecommute from home, the employee's home is not a business establishment and a separate 300 log is not required. Employees who telecommute must be linked to one of your establishments under Section 1904.30, b. 3. Injury or illness. An injury or illness is an abnormal condition or disorder. Injuries include cases such as, but not limited to, a cut, fracture, sprain, or amputation. Illnesses include both acute and chronic illnesses, such as, but not limited to, a skin disease, respiratory disorder, or poisoning. Note, injuries and illnesses are recordable only if they are new, work-related cases that meet one or more of the Part 1904 recording criteria. Physician or other licensed healthcare professional. A physician or other licensed healthcare professional is an individual whose legally permitted scope of practice, i.e., license, registration, or certification, allows him or her to independently perform, or be delegated the responsibility to perform, the activities described by this regulation. U means an employer as defined in Section 3 of the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, 29 U.S.C. 652.